Hey guys, Simone Mendez here, and today I wanted to talk to you all about boundaries. I feel like we might have talked about this before, but it was just something that I felt was important to reiterate, especially coming off of the last video that I shared with you all in regards to time management and being able to listen to yourself and determine when you might be taking on too much and knowing how to say no to things. And so, with that, comes the importance of boundaries, right? And so, what are boundaries? When you hear the word boundaries, a lot of times you think of, at least when I hear the word boundaries, I think of kids, like something that you implement with kids because you want to ensure that they are safe, that they are protected, and that they know how to communicate and interact with others. Well, that is something that we as adults need as well. And so, yes, it is very important to instill and teach the importance of boundaries with children, but we need them as adults. And the interesting thing is more often than not, adults are the ones who tend to struggle with enforcing boundaries as well as knowing how to respect the boundaries of others. Something else that comes to mind when you think of boundaries is just with romantic interactions, being able to set boundaries, with things that you are uncomfortable with or things that you would prefer not to be involved with in your relationship, and knowing how to voice that. And that's something that's really important, is knowing that it is absolutely okay to voice what your boundaries are, or the fact that someone might be overstepping your boundaries. So let's kind of back it up a little bit and talk about why boundaries are necessary. Similar to small children, again, we need boundaries to keep us safe. We need boundaries as a sense of security, but we also need boundaries so that we as individuals feel comfortable, confident in our surroundings and in our relationships. Boundaries within relationships help us to feel secure. If you feel that someone is violating your boundaries, you no longer trust that person. You no longer feel safe with that person. But the only way that that individual would know that they are violating your boundaries is if in fact you communicate that, which is why it's very, very important to be able to identify what your boundaries are and then communicate that with others so that they too know how to adhere to your boundaries. Because sometimes people inadvertently overstep boundaries because they don't know. Now, sometimes people intentionally overstep boundaries, and that's a completely different situation. But, sometimes people inadvertently overstep boundaries, and it's simply because they were unaware of what your personal boundaries were, which is why it's extremely important to communicate them. So, with that in mind, now that we kind of understand why it is important to establish boundaries, how do you establish boundaries? So for instance, let's kind of take it back to the time example that I brought up. Being able to establish boundaries with your time, in that you know how much time you have available to you. You might work 8 hours a day. You might go to the gym for an hour. You might meal prep for 2 hours, and so on and so forth. And so when it comes down to your free time, you might not have a lot of free time. And so being able to set boundaries in that, if someone is like, hey, can you do this? Or hey, let's hang out, you can say no, because you don't want to cross that boundary of, hey, my alone time, my self-care time is extremely important, and I don't want to skip over that simply because you're asking me to do something. And that is not mean. I promise you, that is not mean. That is you respecting your personal boundaries that you're setting for yourself. And it would be the same thing if somebody else was expressing that to you. If they, were trying to do better with managing their time and ensuring that they are allotting time for self-care, and you invited them to do something, or you asked them to do a favor for you, and they told you no, it's not because they're being mean, it's because they're trying to adhere to the boundaries that they've set for themselves so that they can be more mindful of self-care, taking care of themselves. And that's just one example of establishing boundaries and communicating them. Again, we set boundaries within relationships, in that, if you just start dating somebody and you're not comfortable with physical intimacy early on, or you're not comfortable with, going over to the other individual's home or them coming over to your home, you can establish that from the beginning. That is a boundary that you are wanting to set, and so you have to communicate that with that individual. And it's okay if they don't like it, because if they don't like it, then that's an indication that, hey, that might not be the person for you. And that's also something that's good to remember in your effort to establish boundaries and make it known to others what your boundaries are. If they are unwilling to adhere to your boundaries, then that's a decision that you have to make in regards to, okay, is this someone that I want to continue to keep in my life or to keep close to me? Because your boundaries are important, and if it's something that keeps you safe, if it's something that allows you to feel secure, then people should be willing to respect that. And again, if they aren't, that's okay, that's their choice, but now you have a choice to make in regards to allowing that person to continue to take up space in your life. And so, kind of going back to my dating example, if you're in the beginning stages of dating and you're trying to set boundaries with that other person, for the sake of making this a comfortable experience, a comfortable and safe experience, and you express some boundaries that you would like to adhere to, and that person disagrees, then that is an indication that you have to decide, okay, is this somebody that I would like to continue to keep, to allow to hold space in my life, or is this someone that I might need to part ways with? And it is the same thing with jobs and employers. It is the same thing with friendships, not just romantic relationships. It is the same thing with parents, and that's a hard one, right? As adults, when you think about setting boundaries with parents, but it's necessary because, it's one thing as we are growing up, as we are children, and our parents' job, part of their job, one of their many jobs as parents, is to keep us safe, right? And to, of course, to teach us right from wrong, to raise us to be wonderful, contributing human beings, all of those great things. But as we get older and as we become adults ourselves, that role as a parent diminishes, or really it transitions into more of a friend and a confidant and things like that. And so rather than their job being to keep us safe, it's more to respect the way that we are choosing to live. And so again, an example with that would be, if you have your own place, if you are not living with your parents and you have your own place, you are able to set the boundary that, hey, I would prefer, if you would call before you just stop by. That's not being rude or disrespectful, but rather it's you setting a boundary that this is my home, and I would love for you to respect my home in the same way that I would respect your home. And sometimes that's a little hard. That's a little challenging to navigate, because parents still see us as their children. They still see us as maybe not necessarily kids, but they definitely still see themselves as our caretakers. And so to get to a place where you're learning how to establish boundaries with parents can be tricky waters to navigate, but it's definitely something to push through, because you'll feel more empowered, and you'll also you won't resent your parents, and you won't try to avoid having a relationship with them out of concern that they won't adhere to your boundaries. So those are just a few examples, but the bottom line is that everybody needs boundaries. We personally need boundaries. We need boundaries within relationships. We need boundaries in our day-to-day interactions. And so it's something that, sometimes they're a little uncomfortable to communicate, but that doesn't mean you don't communicate them, because again, boundaries exist for a reason. That, if I could sum it all up, boundaries exist for a reason. And if you feel unsafe, if you feel insecure, but not in the lacking of confidence type of way, but a lack of security within your relationship or your environment or anything like that, if you're feeling those things, it might be time to assess your boundaries and to determine, okay, are my boundaries being respected, or are my boundaries being neglected? And so if they're being respected, okay, then let's, assess for other things. But if they're being neglected, then that's a red flag. That's an indicator that, okay, something has to change. Because if my boundaries are being neglected, this could speak to why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. So it's just something I wanted to quickly share with you all, again, especially after coming off of last video when I was talking about time management and being mindful of how you are using your time and ensuring that, the people within your sphere of influence are respecting your time. And that goes hand in hand with boundaries. So, as always, thank you for listening. If ever you wanted to speak to a counselor, always know that you can reach out to EFSC Cares, which is a program free to EFSC students where you receive free counseling. And so that is a wonderful resource to take advantage of. And just know that it's there if ever you wanted to talk to somebody. And as I always say, there doesn't have to be this tragic major thing happening in your life in order for you to reach out to a therapist. It could just be because you'd like to, talk about things, ask questions, or learn more life management skills. So know that that resource is there, and I will catch you guys next time on the next video. Bye.